All right, thanks everyone for zooming in today and making time for this webinar. We had more than 400 people register today, so we know there's a lot of interest in the power sector infrastructure challenge. What will it take to get to net zero power? Next slide, please. So I'm very excited to be talking to you today about a great paper that we just released and conduct a panel discussion as well with 3 companies that are helping to lead the way in our nation's effort to decarbonize the economy. But before we begin the content of today's webinar, let's take care of a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our C2ES YouTube page soon after this live broadcast. Because we have so many participants, we'll use the Zoom webinar chat box for audience questions, and you could submit your questions at any time, and I'll raise them as time allows, both at the end of our moderated discussion. Today, we're going to start off with a brief overview of the recently released paper, Power Infrastructure Needs for Economy-Wide Decarbonization. Then I'll respond to I'll move on to our panelists from GM, APS, and Intel, and each will deliver some opening remarks, followed by a moderated discussion. And then we'll take a few audience questions. With that, let me quickly introduce my organization, C2ES. Next slide, please. So C2ES, now in its 23rd year, is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on strong policy and action to address climate change. Our core mission is to forge practical solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, expand clean energy, and strengthen resilience to climate impacts. We have a long history of bringing together diverse stakeholders, producing accessible content and publications to help promote climate solutions. Next slide, please. One of our unique features is that we have a Business Environmental Leadership Council, or BELC for short. We believe that business engagement is critical for developing efficient, effective solutions to address climate change. As you can see on the slide here, it includes top companies in the electric power, manufacturing, transportation, high tech, oil and gas, and finance sectors. It's now the largest US-based group of companies devoted solely to addressing climate change. One of the benefits of the BELC is that it's multi-sectoral. So unlike trade associations, companies can talk to other companies outside of their industry on climate policy. Now on to the paper overview. Next slide, please. So last week, we posted this closer look paper to our website, and you can find it at the link in blue in the final bullet on this slide. We know from climate science that we need to reduce emissions dramatically, aiming to become carbon neutral economy-wide by mid-century or sooner, in order to begin to mitigate the effects of high greenhouse gas concentrations. The power sector is really the linchpin of this monumental effort. We know how to make the power sector clean or non-emitting. The power sector is going to have to transform. Most US utilities have already set ambitious clean energy goals and have strategies in place. We're going to deploy massive amounts of renewable energy, energy storage, and other technologies. And while we're making the power sector cleaner, it's also going to have to be a lot larger. It's going to have to produce a lot more electricity because we're going to electrify as many end uses as we possibly can. We're going to electrify cars and trucks, replacing gasoline and diesel engines with electric power where we can, and with lower carbon and decarbonized fuels like biofuels and hydrogen where those make sense. Additionally, we're going to electrify buildings, shifting from oil and natural gas to electric heat pumps and all electric home appliances. Next slide, please. What are the infrastructure needs of pursuing such a decarbonization effort? To achieve a 100% clean power sector, we're going to deploy a lot of new clean generation. In 2020, a little more than 60% of electricity generation came from emitting sources. All of this firm, dispatchable electric capacity has to be replaced with new wind, solar, hydro, other renewables, fossil fuels with carbon capture, utilization and sequestration, or CCUS, and nuclear power, non-emitting generation resources. The combination of resources that ultimately gets deployed is up to us. Additionally, we're going to need to deploy much more energy storage to help smooth out output from increasing percentages of variable renewable generation, among other things. But the primary focus of this closer look paper is the impact that all of this will have on power transmission lines. There are many possible ways to achieve decarbonization in the power sector, but modeling shows that high levels of variable renewable electricity, in particular, depend on a highly integrated national high voltage transmission network, something that does not currently exist. And the lower capacity factors for wind and solar compared to dispatchable power plants mean that more variable renewable generation capacity needs to be built and connected. As a conservative estimate for a high renewable scenario where, say, there's more than 75 or 80% of electricity is being generated by renewables, interregional transmission capacity is going to need to increase by 50% or more. Next slide, please. Now, siting any lengthy high voltage power line across multiple states and jurisdictions has proven to be exceptionally challenging in recent years. To be fair, many other types of energy infrastructure, from fuel pipelines to wind farms, have also faced significant opposition. Interregional transmission can face planning and permitting hurdles, including contested permits and litigation from multiple states, regional authorities, federal agencies, and local interests. Individual lines can take more than a decade before they are fully deployed, assuming that they are successfully able to navigate the gauntlet of obstacles at all. To people who follow this space, the names of some of these projects will be familiar. The Sand Hills project, the Northern Pass, and the Grain Belt Express projects. These were all proposed in 2011 and 2012. None of them have been built yet. Each project has faced a barrage of legal challenges, and the Northern Pass project in particular was eventually canceled in 2019. But it's not all brick walls. There are strategies that have worked too. Texas, for example, successfully spurred infrastructure development by establishing competitive renewable energy zones, CREZ or REZ for short. They were able to construct more than 3,500 miles of transmission lines capable of carrying more than 18,500 megawatts of electricity between 2005 and 2013, and wind curtailments dropped significantly. Another promising approach that could ease transmission siting difficulties involves undergrounding and co-location of transmission in existing transportation rights of way, for example, a railway corridor. While building or undergrounding while burying or undergrounding can cost 10 times the amount of overhead transmission, it can increase, at the same time, it can increase power system resilience, and it can mitigate public opposition by eliminating visible infrastructure, one of the main objections to transmission. And this strategy is currently being pursued with the So Green HVDC, high voltage DC link in Iowa and Illinois. Next slide, please. One thing that's certainly become clear in the process of putting this paper together is there's no one-size-fits-all policy that will solve the transmission issue. Rather, we see it as a collection of policies that both minimize the total amount of transmission that needs to be built and at the same time adopt successful and promising policies to get the transmission that we absolutely need to be deployed. As far as minimizing needed transmission, I mentioned the decarbonization modeling makes clear that high renewable penetration requires substantial deployment of transmission infrastructure. And virtually all scenarios involve significant expansions of renewables. So increasing the share of flexible, firm, non-emitting generation in the electricity mix can significantly lessen the need for transmission. So policymakers should consider policies that maintain existing firm, non-emitting generation as long as possible. And to be explicit, I'm talking about nuclear power and legacy hydropower plants. Policymakers should also advance the production and supply of low carbon fuels like hydrogen, renewable natural gas, and biofuels to replace emitting fuels in existing firm generation. And they should invest in innovation to help develop and deploy low-cost, flexible, firm low-carbon generation technologies that are at a more early stage of development, such as advanced nuclear, advanced geothermal, and CCUS technology. It's also clear that energy efficiency measures across all sectors will reduce the magnitude of the mid-century power sector, the size of the power sector that we need. And thus all of the associated infrastructure that we need to build. So policies should be adopted across the board in every sector on energy to incentivize energy efficiency, such as building efficiency, appliances, and equipment standards, for example. In addition, the paper explored several trends that are emerging regarding electric vehicles, distributed generation, and energy storage. Policymakers should consider and adopt policies that help minimize peak demand due to EV charging, such as incentives for off-peak charging through policies like time of use pricing, and implementation of managed charging programs. They should increase support for city and regional public transportation systems and other measures like bike lanes, creating walkable cities that can limit total vehicle miles traveled and reduce the need for vehicle use. They should increase support for and adoption of hydrogen and other low carbon alternative transportation fuels and power sector fuels as well, particularly for medium and heavy duty vehicles, which can be stored more easily than electricity and avoid huge increases in power demand. And liquid fuels also offer other benefits in the transportation sector, like more rapid refueling times, especially for heavy duty vehicles. They should advance to the extent feasible with the consideration of affordability, other issues like local construction of clean energy sources, building resources close to where demand is, which helps avoid the need for long distance high voltage transmission. They should require utilities to provide non-wires alternatives such as energy storage, in addition to new transmission line proposals, so they can be evaluated on cost, reliability, visual impacts, congestion relief, and so forth. And there should be a lot of investment in energy storage on multiple fronts, working to improve battery chemistries and designs to make them cheaper and safer, developing long-term storage options that behave more like firm dispatchable power, and evaluating and advancing the production of non-emitting energy carriers like hydrogen, ammonia, and using carbon-free electricity sources. As far as the need for getting transmission built, the paper recommends a few reports from NREL, from FERC, and America's Power Plan. We see siting approaches as key, and getting approval at the local level is often the hardest part. So getting buy-in from local stakeholders early in the process is key, among many other things. FERC, perhaps with new or strengthened authority from Congress, can also play a role in identifying, valuing, and citing key interregional transmission. Next slide, please. So I'd like to shift gears now and introduce our first panelist, Kelly Helfrich. She is the manager of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure at General Motors. Kelly's focused on creating and deploying smart transportation solutions powered by zero emissions. Since joining GM, Kelly has overseen the deployment of hundreds of electrical vehicles across major US cities. Kelly, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Doug. So hi, everyone. Kelly Helfrich here. I'm coming to you from the area of Detroit, Michigan. I've been with GM for about 5 years now, and I've been a Bolt EV driver for about 3 years now, and never going back to gasoline. I joined the company because of its focus on electric vehicles. I'm originally from the Detroit area, and when GM made it clear their ambition to transition to zero emissions and switch its entire portfolio from ICE to electric vehicles, I saw it as a really compelling time to join the company, and have always, thought with the strength of our manufacturing and engineering expertise here in Detroit, coupled with an ambitious vision like shifting the entire company over to electric, it's been a fun time to be at the company in this changing time. So as you all may know, we've got a big plan to be with our 0, 0, 0 vision, zero emissions, zero congestion, and zero accidents. And so my day job focuses on making sure we meet that first one, zero emissions. Doug had in one of his slides the word thoughtful integration of electric vehicles into the grid. And that's my sole focus, is making sure that our electric vehicles that we're deploying are thoughtfully integrated with the grid, that we have the right partnerships with utilities across the country and across the world, and making sure that our electric vehicles can be optimized with renewable energy sources and charged at the best time for the grid. So a few comments on GM overall. As some of you may know, we've had the Volt Victor since 2011 in market. That was a plug-in hybrid vehicle. And then in 2017, we launched the all-electric Bolt EV. So we've had electric vehicles on road for over a decade, and are planning to launch 30 new electric vehicles within the next few years globally. So you may have seen some of the announcements around the Hummer EV, the Hummer SUV. We'll be releasing an all-electric pickup truck, and then the Cadillac Lyriq was recently announced as well, which is a pretty Cadillac all-electric vehicle. The other thing is that we're building on our Bolt EV platform, so we've got an updated version of that coming out, as well as the Bolt EUV, which we like to call the big brother. It's just a little bit bigger than the Bolt EV, and I think it'll be a popular vehicle because we realize that not everyone's lifestyle can fit into a compact electric vehicle. So we really want to bring these other types of EVs, different size vehicles, different styles, to the masses. We're committed to putting every driver in an electric vehicle. And so in order to reach that goal, we know that different vehicles need to be brought to market. So we're committed to doing that. As it relates to EVs and the grid, we've got a few interesting things going on in this space. As you all know, with an electric vehicle and with many of our ICE vehicles also, they're connected. They're already smart vehicles. And so we're collecting data on these vehicles all the time. With an electric vehicle, it's really important to know when they're being charged and how much power they're consuming so that you can optimize that with the grid. Where there's a huge opportunity with EVs is shifting the active charge hours into times when renewable energy is online. So if you think of a typical use case of a US driver, for example, and my lifestyle falls into the average data metrics of a US driver, at least before we were all working from home, where you're driving 40 to 50 miles per day. And I have a home charging opportunity and a workplace charging opportunity. We know a lot of our customers just have one or the other. But if you think about that typical use case, I'm driving 50 miles a day. I come home, and with my Volt EV, I just charge on a level 120 volt charger, just a normal outlet that was in my garage. And I plug in every night, and I'm still fully charged every morning by the time I needed to leave for work. So there was a lot of people like that, where they're not fully depleting their battery every day. So when you think about someone, especially charging at higher power levels, like 7 kilowatts with level 2, if I came home at 7 p.m. plugged in, I'd be fully charged by 9 p.m., but my vehicle would just sit in my garage until 7 a.m. the next morning. So that gives us a lot of opportunity to shift your active charging hours into times when it's best for the grid. So maybe we know more wind energy is coming online at 11 p.m., so we can just delay your charge to not begin until then. The EV driver is happy because they're still going to be fully charged when they need to be in the morning. And the utility and the OEM can work together to make sure that that charging time is really the best for overall energy use and is still meeting customers' driving preferences. So we're doing a lot of programs like that with utilities. The other thing that's neat about our future electric vehicles that are coming out, with the Volt EV, we've had a standard just level 1 charge cord that's come in the trunk, which is, of course, just what I use. We know, over 30% of our drivers are just using that for home charging. But with these larger vehicles and with more and more people adopting electric vehicles, we know that a lot more folks want to do higher level charging at home. So level 2, 7 kilowatt charging. So with the purchase of your EV, we're providing a standard level 2, it's called a pigtail, that comes with the level 1 cord that allows you to charge at 30 amps or up to 7 kilowatts, just with the cord that comes with your car. And so the goal there is make your EV ready as soon as you drive off the lot, to charge it when you need to, and to be optimized with the grid. And so we think we'll see a lot more uptake of level 2 home charging once that cord comes for free in your car, because it, of course, requires 0 separate hardware purchase on the customer, which is a good customer experience to not have to buy a separate piece of hardware after you've purchased your vehicle. So I think that's a promising kind of simple step that we're making toward ensuring that our drivers can charge at higher power rates, ready to go, and we're going to make it so that their vehicles are connected with the grid and able to be optimized. So those are my comments. I wanted to thank Doug and the team for having me here. And Doug, if you had any quick questions, we'll be happy to take those now before the next panelist is introduced. So thank you.
Sure, great. The timing is good. I know that you have a hard stop at the bottom of the hour, so we do have just a couple minutes here. I think there's a great question from one of the audience participants, Maya, who's asking about vehicle to grid technology and battery storage. So maybe you could just talk a bit about where that's at right now.
Sure. So
sorry, I should explain a little bit more. How we're going to how cars can be a resource for the grid effectively.
Yep. So everything we're doing today is so the broad umbrella term, vehicle grid integration. 2 of the major categories underneath that term are V1G and V2G. Everything we're doing today is V1G. We're able to ingest a signal from the utility of when to stop or start someone's charging. So we're doing a lot of programs on the V1G side. once we have V2G capable vehicles, you're able to do everything with V1G, but you're also able to deliver power back to the grid. There's a lot of opportunity there, basically using your electric vehicle either as a backup generator for your home or using your electric vehicle actually to deliver power back to the grid and get compensated for that. There's a lot of work to be done in that space for the industry to reach vehicle to grid at scale. But I think the general consensus is the opportunity is compelling enough to interest people to want to work on the regulations needed, the policies needed, the engineering needed in order to outfit vehicles and charging stations with the capability to deliver power back. So I think the technology will be there within the next 6 years. We do not have any V2G capable vehicles on the road today. It's kind of like everything needs to come along together to have this make sense. But it is a cool opportunity for EVs to be involved in at some point in the near future, because it's an opportunity that other smart devices like thermostats, smart water heaters, like they can't provide power back. Their communication is just one way. You can either stop their consumption or start it. And so we're looking forward to releasing vehicle to grid capable vehicles at some point here, just not today.
Thanks, Kelly. Totally agree. It's a very compelling technology, flexible demand, especially as we get more and more variable renewable electricity on the grid is going to be extremely important. And we're going to need a lot of technology to help us manage all of that. So I know that you need to get going. I thank you so much for spending time with us today, and hopefully we'll have you on another panel again soon. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thanks, Doug.
Take care. All right, so now it's my pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Ann Becker. Ann is the Vice President, Sustainability for Arizona Public Service Company. Ann is responsible for the company's overarching sustainability strategies with a focus on integrating environmental, social, and governance standards across the company's core business operations. Ann, I believe your slides are up and you have the floor.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you to C2ES for inviting me to participate in this really important conversation about how we are going to work together effectively to achieve our goal of accelerating decarbonization. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about my company, who we are, and what we do. I work for Arizona Public Service Company. We're the largest provider of electricity in the state of Arizona, and we've been around a really long time. We've been around for about 150 years. We provide service in 11 of Arizona's 15 counties. And the main thing I want to point out about who we are is where we are. And that is, we are in the desert Southwest, which is frankly a lovely and beautiful place. We're in the Sonoran Desert here, and it's just gorgeous, especially this time of year. But it's also extremely, extremely hot where we are. The National Climate Assessment Report has noted that the desert Southwest has one of the highest levels of temperature change in the country so far. We've had an average temperature increase of about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit just in the last couple of decades. And that has been paired with these significantly reduced levels of precipitation. So last year, 2020, was the hottest summer on record for us. We had more than 50 days of greater than 110 degree temperatures. And the previous record was 33 days. And we also had the driest summer on record. We are now expecting that the Bureau of Reclamation will declare a formal water shortage on the Colorado River for 2022, which will immediately impact agricultural users here in the state of Arizona. And then depending on the severity of that drought, the implications become more and more severe. Next slide, please. So I'm really excited to talk with you about our clean energy commitment. We made a commitment a year ago, last January, to achieve 100% clean, carbon-free electricity by 2050. And our goal is to achieve absolute zero. And I think it's important to understand the distinction between absolute zero and net zero, because these are words that we see very frequently. And they've got the meaning of those words is really important because they mean very different things. Absolute zero means that we are eliminating carbon emissions from our generation portfolio. We are getting rid of them. Net zero means that the emitter is going to continue to emit carbon, but will find ways to offset those carbon emissions in other ways. For example, electrifying a fleet of vehicles, or establishing carbon sinks, planting trees, and those sorts of things. So we are proud that our goal is to be absolutely 100% carbon-free and clean by 2050. And we've established the milestones that you can see here that will guide us there. So by 2030, our goal is to be 45% renewable and 65% clean. By 2031, we will be fully out of the coal business. Our last coal plant closes in 2031, and we know that carbon emissions from coal are at least twice what they are from natural gas emissions. So the first step in decarbonizing is really to shift to lower carbon generating resources. Why did we make this commitment? I think the primary reason we made this commitment is because we believe the climate science. We believe that the climate science is clear, that action needs to be taken. Our plan is consistent with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report, requiring or suggesting that we need to achieve a collective goal of limiting the increase in temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2050. And so our plan is consistent with that scenario. We want to be a leader in this space. We want to play an important leadership role in shaping a forward-thinking, healthy, and prosperous Arizona. We know that electricity is a fundamental building block of modern life. It is a necessity in our summer months here in particular. And so we know that the future of our state and the economy in the state of Arizona is going to be dependent upon clean, affordable, and reliable electricity. So we established a goal of absolute zero in order to signal to the market the need for innovative solutions. We know that those solutions are out there, and we are hoping that by setting this firm stake in the ground of carbon-free electricity by 2050, we are signaling to the market, and the intent is that they will respond with the technologies that we need to achieve these goals. We are starting from a position of strength. Our resource mix is already 50% clean. We operate, and we are a part owner of the largest nuclear power plant in the United States, the Palo Verde nuclear power plant, which is about 60 miles that way. And it's an amazing nuclear plant. It's the only nuclear plant in the world that is not located on a body of water, an ocean, a river, or a lake. We actually use reclaimed water from the city of Phoenix and some of the other surrounding metropolitan areas to provide water to Palo Verde for cooling and for generating electricity. And so it's a really innovative solution that respects the challenges that we face here in the desert Southwest in terms of water conservation. So we know we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we are ready for the challenge. Next slide, please. I want to talk about a couple of the important elements for success for us. First of all, as I mentioned, a strong economy and growth in Arizona will be critical. It's really important that Arizona remain healthy fiscally, because we know that the strongest environmental outcomes are those that are achieved in the strongest economies. And so a strong Arizona is really going to allow us to be strategic in plotting our course towards clean. Policy decisions also will be critical here. There's been a flurry of activity in Washington, D.C. since the Biden administration took up residence. So it's really important that a clean energy standard that really drives the industry towards decarbonization is shaped appropriately and effectively and in a way that will help us achieve our goals. We need flexibility. So for example, one thing that we know doesn't work is what's called a uniform rate of progress. And we have seen this in some of the legislation, the proposed legislation out of the House, which has required an annual rate of improvement. So you are reducing your carbon emissions at the same time that you're bringing renewables online at an annual rate of progress. And that's just not reflective of reality. Our next coal plant comes offline in 2025. After that, Our last coal plant comes offline in 2031. So you can see that we've got chunks of reductions in carbon emissions, but it doesn't happen year over year. So policy decisions that contemplate and really understand and address these challenges are going to be very, very important for us to be successful here. We also need to maximize our existing resources. Our nuclear power plant is critical to our plan and to our success. It is the largest source of carbon-free electricity in the US. It's reliable, it's affordable, and it is critical to us achieving our objectives. We also need to continue to rely on existing natural gas for the foreseeable future. Gas emits carbon, but it is a cleaner alternative than coal, and it is a very necessary bridge fuel while new clean generation is developed and while we're bringing new technologies like battery storage online. We also will need to continue to embrace market-based solutions. One example that's been very successful for us is the energy imbalance market in California, which we joined several years ago, which provides our customers with access to low and sometimes no or negative cost renewables, which is an interesting phenomenon. In California, given all of their solar resources, there are times of the day when they have too much and they have to offload. So they actually sell. We actually are able to obtain that solar power from them, and they pay us to take it because of the situation in California. So participating in those markets will be important to our success. Electrification, as we heard, is going to be really important, and it's important for the electric utility industry to decarbonize effectively and efficiently in order to enable the electrification that will be needed. We need to continue to modernize the grid. We have been working on and we are continuing to develop a more resilient grid that can adapt to our future needs and that really will give our customers the choices and the controls that they want over their own electricity usage. And then certainly energy storage solutions are critical here. We were an early adopter of battery technology, which I'll talk about a little bit in another slide or two. And battery technology is going to be critical to our success. Storage will help us shift our energy needs to the time of the day when energy is most abundant. Another thing that's critical is our customers. We need our customers to be on this journey with us. We need habits like supercooling to become part of our daily life. Supercooling means you turn your air conditioner on during off-peak hours and you cool your house down really well, such that during the peak hours, your house is already cool. And it's very, very important that customers understand these challenges and partner with us to achieve this success. Bottom line here, we know how to do this through about 2035 to 2040. After 2040, we are reliant on technology that is yet to emerge or that will be further developed, like battery storage. So those last 10 years are an unknown. And I think it's important that we talk about that. We are going to be reliant on technology that doesn't yet exist. But we do believe we can solve this enormous challenge by establishing a balance between clean, affordable, and reliable. Next slide, please. I don't want to spend a lot of time here. I think you'll have access to this information in this slide. Basically, you can see that we've got a need here to add a lot of renewable technologies and resources to the grid in the next 5 years. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about battery storage for a moment here, because this is a really important part of our success. We've got some customer-facing battery storage programs. We also have some utility-scale battery storage, and I want to talk about both. Our customer-facing storage program is called the Storage Rewards Program, and it is a pilot program only. But the intent here is we want to get more residential batteries onto the grid so that we can better understand how they work. We are still learning how battery storage technology works. So we've targeted these batteries to high demand locations, and we have removed the cost and the uncertainty of owning a battery. So in our Storage Rewards Program, APS owns and maintains the battery. Our customers get a one-time $500 bill credit, and we charge those batteries during off-peak periods, and we use the energy during our high energy periods. And most importantly, this pilot is giving us some incredibly valuable firsthand data on the usability and impact of these batteries. Next slide, please. Okay, just want to talk for a minute about our, next slide, please. want to spend a minute talking about our utility scale battery storage. We've got a couple of projects underway here. Pumpkin Center is a rural community in central Arizona. It's got a population of about 600 people. It's about 90 miles northeast of Phoenix. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And we needed to rebuild about 20 miles of transmission and distribution poles and wires in the area. They were degraded. They needed to be rebuilt. We opted instead to implement battery storage as a solution here. We used batteries in lieu of traditional transmission infrastructure. We installed two 4 megawatt hour battery storage systems, and those batteries are increasing power reliability in that area. We also are learning a lot about how batteries work. 2 years ago, in April of 2019, one of our new battery projects called McMicken experienced an internal cell failure in a battery cell, and it caused a thermal event that damaged the entire battery energy storage system, and it sent a number of first responders to the hospital. It was a tragic event. And after an extensive investigation, the cause was revealed to be a defect in an internal cell. So we are learning a lot from this event. It is allowing us to improve upon the design and the operation of batteries, and is allowing us to make them safer to operate. We install, and we're planning to install, about 750 to 850 megawatts of energy storage by 2025. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you our carbon trajectory under a couple of different scenarios in our resource plan. And you can see here that all of the plans get us to absolute zero by 2050. Depending on which plan we implement, there are some plans that are more aggressive than others. And a lot of that decision-making will be shaped by the policy that comes out of DC on a clean energy standard. Next slide, please. Okay, I wanted to end with this because I think that this is really important. We believe that this transition to clean energy it's critical. It needs to happen. It's consistent with the climate science. It is the socially responsible and the environmentally responsible thing to do. And so that's why we are in this. But we also believe that this transition to clean energy needs to be just and equitable. We know that our legacy fossil plants, our coal-fired power plants, fueled the prosperity of the state of Arizona. We would not be where we are without those coal-fired power plants. And they were necessary to building the vibrant economy that we all enjoy today. So it was very important to us as we thought about this transition that we remember and not forget about these communities as we transition away from coal. One of our coal plants is located on the Navajo Nation up in northwestern New Mexico. There was another coal plant on the Navajo Nation that closed at the end of 2019 called the Navajo Generating Station. And between the Navajo Generating Station and our power plant on the Navajo Nation, the coal royalties, the taxes, and the benefits, the lease payments that accrued to the Navajo Nation as a result of these two power plants and the mines that fueled those plants comprised more than 60% of the total revenue of the Navajo Nation. So one of those plants is gone, the other one is going away. That is a significant and devastating hit to the Navajo Nation with no immediate plans for how they will replace that revenue. So as we were designing our transition to clean energy, this was really important to us. And we have proposed a settlement that is currently pending in front of our Public Utility Commission, the Arizona Corporation Commission, a settlement transition package of about $144 million that will go directly to the Navajo Nation and the other communities that are located around these coal plants and mines that will be impacted by plant closures. And that funding is intended for transition support, economic development, in order to identify how to transition to clean energy, job retraining and development for the miners and the coal plant workers who may lose their jobs as a result of these plant closures. We have made a commitment that none of our employees will lose their jobs. We will make employment available to them across the rest of the APS fleet. But on the Navajo Nation, a lot of these people are really rooted in their communities and have been there for years and years and don't have a desire to leave, to take a job in Phoenix or to move to California. And so job retraining and development is a critical part of this transition package. And then on the Navajo Nation, a number of homes remain without electricity. We saw the impacts, the heavy impact of COVID on the Navajo Nation as a result largely of the lack of electricity and the lack of access to clean running water. And so a piece of our transition commitment to the Navajo Nation also includes the identification of homes that are lacking electricity. Many of these are very, very rural areas, and then the provision of electricity to those homes. So what we have called coal community transition is a really important piece that we need to remember and that needs to stay part of this conversation about the transition to clean energy. And with that, I will stop, and I am happy to respond to any questions that folks may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. That was fantastic. I think you bring up a lot of really important points that people don't always think about in the clean transition, things like equity and providing transition assistance. And also, I think an excellent point too on having flexible policy with regard to a clean energy standard as well. I think that's a really important point to get into the debate about the type of clean energy standard that will eventually be coming from, hopefully, from Congress. All right, so we're going to switch gears now to our final panelist. It's my pleasure to introduce Steve Harper. Steve is the Senior Director of Environment, Energy, and Sustainability Policy at the Intel Corporation. He is responsible for advising senior management and leading company influencing efforts on topics ranging from chemicals management to energy efficiency, water policy, and the role of Intel's products in helping meet society's toughest sustainability challenges. Steve, I think your slides are ready, and you now have the floor.
Great, thanks, Doug. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm very happy to be here today. We've been a member of the BELC at C2ES for almost the entire time C2ES has been around. I think we joined about 6 months in and have found the association with C2ES and with the other BELC companies to be extremely valuable. Next slide, please. So first I want to just talk a little bit about our so-called RISE initiative, and I won't go into the acronym, but suffice it to say it's a set of 2030 goals that we have established globally that are sustainability related, but also include diversity and inclusion and some other aspects of ESG as it is known in the trade. Here's some summaries of the sustainability aspects. First, I should back up for a second and say a couple of things about Intel. I think most people know the Intel name. We're actually in Arizona in a big way. I think we're one of the biggest, if not the biggest, industrial employers in Arizona. We're not an APS customer. We're serviced by Salt River Project, but have a lot of respect for the work that APS has done. We've just announced a $20 billion expansion plan in Arizona, where we're going to add a couple of additional fabrication plants to our existing facility in Chandler, Arizona. But we also have very major investments in manufacturing and technical development in Oregon, a lot of professional design and other activities in California, fabrication in New Mexico, Ireland, and Israel. We're very big employers in all of those places. And then the back end so-called assembly test process in our company takes place mostly in China, Vietnam, and Costa Rica. So we're very diverse. We're mostly known for making the CPUs that power about 90+% of the servers and data centers in the world and the vast majority of PCs. But we also are heavily invested in Internet of Things technology, artificial intelligence, and relatively less known in the autonomous vehicle space. We have a large Israeli subsidiary called Mobileye that is one of the leading developers of autonomous vehicle technology. And of course, autonomous vehicles are all electric. So that's a big EV investment as well. On the sustainability side, we have been 100% powered by renewable energy for a very long time, going on 10 years now. We also have made a huge investment in water recycling. We are water positive, we intend to be water positive. Currently, we recycle about 80% of the massive amount of water that we use. The other 20%, which we cannot recycle, we make up for by doing projects with other companies and other communities to help them improve their water recovery and recycling. Most of that is in the Colorado River Basin. So next slide, please. One of the things I should have mentioned on the previous slide is, and I'll get to in a second, is a major part of our commitment on sustainability is to the use of our technologies, the use of our products in other sectors of the economy, what we call the handprint, and I'll focus on that in a couple of slides. So my focus here today is mostly on the distribution side. Doug talked about the challenges of transmission and adding transmission capacity, but there are also some substantial challenges related to the distribution grid. And of course, the trend right now is to emphasize electrifying everything. And as you electrify more and more end uses of energy, that will only lead to additional stress on the grid and more of a need to increase the penetration of renewable energy and storage. And so we think that if you can strengthen the distribution grid, you can help take some of the pressure off of transmission, but we're going to need both. And we're particularly focused on the digitalization of the grid, turning consumers into producers, and what's known in the trade as prosumers. Next slide. This slide just tries to visually represent that phenomenon where instead of a one-way flow of electrons and information, increasingly you have a two-way flow, which enables distributed energy resources. Next slide. So this is taken from the report that Doug gave a summary of earlier. A digital grid on the distribution side allows enhanced observability to the grid operator, more local autonomous coordination at the distribution side or on the distribution side, more flexible network design and two-way flow of both electrons and data, increased ability for the system to self-heal, and again, as I mentioned earlier, greater transparency by the grid operator to what's actually going on in the distribution system. A lot of the technologies that enable these characteristics already exist. Some of them, however, because of the conservative nature of public utility commissions and the fact that utilities, generally speaking, can't invest in things that they can't rate base, and the PUC, or in Arizona's case, the Corporation Commission, controls that, and they're conservative. They're conservative in the sense that they often won't allow investment in quote unquote new technology unless that technology has been demonstrated in multiple locations on the ground in other systems. And so one of the things that we're pushing for on the policy side is the need for more funding for demonstration projects out on the ground. And these are some of the areas that really need some significant RD&D help. I won't go through them individually, but they're all important. And so, Department of Energy has a number of existing authorities that would allow them to provide more funding for these kinds of technologies in the demonstration realm. We're going to be pushing through our various coalitions, including C2ES, for additional funding for those authorities. Next slide. So one of the things that we're particularly focused on and have pilot projects in the laboratories of both Salt River Project and Southern California Edison is digitalizing the substation. Substations now, if you were to drive by them or go into them, they're electromechanical. It's technology that's been around for decades, and they are by no means intelligent. If you digitalize a substation, which essentially turns the substation into a server rack, you can improve demand response capabilities. You can dramatically improve the ability to integrate renewables and or to prevent curtailment. Again, as I mentioned earlier, improve the integration of distributed energy resources and also advance smart EV charging capabilities. Next slide. So we have this project I mentioned earlier in Salt River Project and with Southern California Edison, where we're demonstrating the benefits of what we call flattening the grid. And this is just a graphic representation of the two-way flow of electrons and data that are enabled by this technology. This technology is only in the labs, and we're going to be looking with partners, and our major partner here is Dell and their subsidiary VMware. We're going to be looking to partner with the Department of Energy and others to actually implement some of these ideas on the ground to demonstrate the value. Next slide. So I mentioned the handprint earlier. The handprint is increasingly gaining currency as a term to represent the opposite of the footprint. Every industry, every person has a footprint, whether it's climate, energy, water, et cetera. It's your direct negative impacts. The handprint, in our case, is the role that our technologies and our customers' technologies, and in fact, the whole network, including data centers, has been able to provide historically and increasingly in future the ability to help other sectors of the economy reduce their footprint. This is the realm of so-called smart technology: smart cars, smart homes, smart buildings, smart cities, et cetera. And in fact, although it's hard to quantify this, American Council on an Energy Efficient Economy has done a sort of meta-analysis and estimated that for every additional unit of energy that's consumed by a new ICT device, an average of 7 units are actually saved through the intelligent efficiency and systematic or system-wide efficiency benefits of that technology. Next slide. What that means for us, quite frankly, is if you could do the quantification, we're not just net zero, we're not zero, we're actually climate positive in the sense that our technologies out on the landscape are helping to save a lot more energy than we are directly responsible for, and a lot more carbon emissions. So finally, the next 2 slides, we are very active and will continue to be very active. No, go back one, please. With C2ES and with the BELC in trying to influence how the policies that have been proposed by both sides of the aisle and by the White House, how they actually hopefully eventuate into legislation. But in addition, we're also working through 2 additional coalitions. And our objective in all of our work, and our work directly, is going to be to improve and increase the digital component of climate policy and energy policy in the United States. Unfortunately, most of the plans that have been put forward have very little digital content. And part of it is because digital technologies are pervasive throughout the economy and are easy to overlook. But our objective is going to be to improve and increase the digital content because we think it's the smart sort of 21st century way to go. One of our coalitions, which we founded recently, is the Digital Climate Alliance. It's a small group. Here you can see the companies. We're very much focused on, as I say, increasing the digital content of climate policy. And the last slide. Finally, one of our big focuses is grid modernization. There's a lot of existing authority to enable DOE and others to attack infrastructure needs. And it's interesting in DC right now, there's kind of a bogus debate between the parties over what's infrastructure. And one side thinks infrastructure is roads and bridges and harbors, full stop. We're of the opinion that the grid is certainly part of infrastructure. 5G is an infrastructure issue. And we want the definition of infrastructure to be broadened, certainly to include the grid. Here are the members of GridWise, which is focused on grid modernization. Note that APS is also a member of GridWise. So we look forward to working very closely with C2ES, and hopefully we can realize some of the potential of these technologies in the next year or two. That's it.
Great, thank you, Steve. There are so many questions that you've raised there for me. I talk in the paper a lot about centralized versus distributed. Don't really get into all these details that you bring up about substations and making substations from electromechanical to smart substations. So I'm first, just basic question, how many of these smart substations exist today, or is it really an extremely nascent area of development?
Well, I can't speak with a complete authority on this, but I think it's safe to say there's not much of this actually on the ground as we speak. That's why we're doing the lab level pilot projects with two of our utility partners, and wanting to get it actually out onto the ground in an actual project, an actual implementation, or two or three or four, so the public utility commissions can have confidence that this approach actually works in practice. So that's why there's need for DOE involvement.
Absolutely. Is it your expectation that this is the kind of upgrade that would occur on an existing substation, or is this something that needs to be developed from the ground up on a new substation?
I think both can work, but it's not going to be an adaptation of the existing substation. It's going to be a change out of the guts of the facility. So these are not add-on technologies; these are substitute technologies.
So, in terms of siting of substations, in cities, it's probably more challenging. And this, I want to bring Ann in on this. Ann, do you have any thoughts on how substations upgrades might occur in APS's territory, or have you already been involved with making smarter substations in APS?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've got a whole group of people that spend all their time thinking about these issues and designing the substation of the future. And location certainly is a really critical component and something that we think about. I will inject another environmental justice vibe here, if I may, because we are so focused on environmental justice as we move forward and how we best integrate social responsibility into the decarbonization conversation. We've been having these conversations. It's important to think about, are we locating a substation in a neighborhood that is traditionally underserved, or that has borne a heavier brunt of the environmental burden, if you will? So those are all things that go into the calculus around siting substations, and really all of our siting activities. We site distribution lines, power plants, and those kinds of things. And so those are considerations that frankly were not part of our thinking 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, but they certainly are now. And we are really pleased to see that coming out of the Biden administration is a similarly heavy focus on environmental justice. It is embedded in everything about their accelerated decarbonization plan. Very, very heavy focus on environmental justice and historically underserved communities.
Can I add to that? There's an interesting phenomenon going on in Oregon. We're the largest private employer in the state of Oregon. We have 20,000+ people in the Portland area. And Oregon, for the last several years, has been busy trying to develop a cap and trade system for climate. And we've been working closely with Governor Brown and her staff on that. One of the interesting things about what they're trying to design there to directly get at both environmental justice as a concept and the traditionally bad reputation that cap and trade programs have had for worsening conditions. Think of what happened to Mary Nichols' potential nomination to head EPA. Basically got derailed because of concerns, rightly or wrongly, about the record of cap and trade in California. In Oregon, and it's far from being set in concrete, but what they're trying to do is, if you can't meet your target, whatever your allowance level is under the program, instead of going to buy credits from another source to cover your shortage, you would pay into a fund that the state would administer, and the state would use to actually fund environmental justice related projects in underserved communities throughout the state. And they're really trying to turn what could be a potential negative criticism of cap and trade, I think somewhat overblown, but nonetheless politically very powerful, into an actual positive for the program. And again, it's far from certain they'll be able to finalize it, but it certainly is a creative idea that's worth watching.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We've also seen a very parallel trend in some of the proposed legislation. There's a draft legislation out of the House right now called the Clean Future Act, and its structure is very similar. If you're not able to comply, you can purchase compliance essentially under certain conditions. And the government will then take the funding there, and it has stated its intent to reinvest at least 40% of that money into environmental justice communities. And so I think we're just seeing an increasing trend to really paying attention to folks that we historically have tended to ignore.
Yeah, and I wanted to pick up on the thread of what APS has done with regard to energy storage. The residential, you mentioned some residential projects where you're experimenting, and you mentioned some of these projects at the utility scale level that you've actually already implemented. And just continuing with the theme of perhaps minimizing transmission as well, and the impact that has on communities, environmental justice communities, and all communities really. I'm curious how and Steve mentioned that the regulator, the Arizona Corporation Commission, and perhaps regulators in general tend to be fairly conservative. How open how open are they to non-wires alternatives like energy storage?
The Corporation Commission, you mean?
The Corporation Commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on who the folks are, who the people are, who the commissioners are, and their politics. We've got an elected commission, and so on a regular cadence, we've got folks coming and going with different agendas. Right now there are several commissioners who are Democrats who I think are very interested in looking at alternatives to traditional methods of moving electrons, if you will. So it's person dependent. It's very specific on the political climate of the time. We've also got a legislature to deal with that tends to be relatively conservative. So it's an interesting mix of politics here in Arizona. We've got 2 Democratic senators, a Republican governor, a mix of Republicans and Democrats on the commission, and then a generally more conservative legislature. And so navigating those politics are challenging. But we've got great relationships with our stakeholders, and I think have really made some inroads here and helping people think about how do we think outside the box and think more creatively as we're designing solutions here.
So one other thing that I wanted to bring up, and it is really a slight tangent, but it's in line with the paper thinking about how we minimize transmission infrastructure. One of the strategies is recognizing the fact that we cannot electrify everything, that we're going to still have to rely to some extent in certain parts of the economy on liquid, low carbon or zero carbon fuels, things like hydrogen. So I wanted to talk to you. I know that there's a project, you mentioned Palo Verde, it's the largest power plant in the US. You mentioned some of the interesting features that it has. It generates 32 terawatts of electricity every year, which is just enormous. I looked at the numbers, that's roughly equal to 3/4 of all the distributed solar that was produced in 2020 by residential, commercial, and industrial solar, not utility scale, but it's just a phenomenal amount just from one facility. So can you just tell us a little bit about what APS is doing with regard to zero carbon fuels like hydrogen?
Yeah, we are, like I said, we've signaled to the market, we need help. We need you to innovate. We need you to partner with us to think of creative solutions. We just launched a pilot project with Idaho National Laboratories and a couple of other peer electric utilities to further explore hydrogen as a potential clean fuel to be used. And I'm not a technical expert, but I understand that you use a process called electrolysis to separate off the hydrogen and to utilize that as fuel, essentially. So we've got this pilot underway. We are very excited about the prospect of hydrogen. We think it's got a lot of potential different applications, and are looking forward to seeing the results that come out of this pilot project with Idaho National Labs.
That's great. I suppose I should, we're getting a lot of questions from the audience here, so let me start to pick off a couple of these questions. This one might be for you, Anne, or more in your wheelhouse. Do you have any comments on what impact you think what happened in Texas this year will affect deregulated power markets in terms of flexible pricing models?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's just been interesting to watch the reactions to Texas and the interpretations that people have laid on top of the events of Texas. In my view, in my company, we really firmly believe that remaining a regulated electric utility here in Arizona is the prudent course for accelerating decarbonization. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And I don't want to point fingers at any deregulated markets, but we continue to believe that this model is really the right model to support accelerated decarbonization.
Can I pick up on that, Doug?
Sure, please.
I don't disagree, and Ann knows her business better than I do, but we have a term, we sell product to virtually every utility in the world. So we've had some experience. I think the big issue in Texas is similar to what happened 20 plus years ago in California. And we were heavily involved in the response to the California market meltdown because our headquarters is there and we have tremendous amount of investment in California. The issue in California initially was people pointed to data centers. And they said data centers and the explosion of data centers is why and there are not enough plants. And it turns out, as we all know now, it was a badly designed, deregulated market. And it was subject, because of the bad design, to manipulation by bad actors. And Enron is no longer around. And they weren't the only ones by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think the problem in California, and we've been involved a bit in Texas because we have some presence there, I don't think the issue is so much deregulated versus regulated. I think a regulated market is easier to manage. Not easy is the wrong word, but is more dependably managed. I think the question is, if you're going to deregulate, you got to deregulate in a smart way. And you've got to do things like winterize your infrastructure. The notion that the windmills in Texas weren't able to function in cold weather, whereas windmills in Minnesota have been functioning in cold weather for years. is not the fault of renewable energy. It's the fault of the way they went about designing their market and the fact that they weren't going to interconnect with any of the other regional grids. So I probably agree on balance with Ann, but I think you can do deregulated markets in a smart way and avoid the kinds of problems they had in California and Texas.
Totally agree with your point about the responsibility of all generation types. They all failed equally, but then they also all work perfectly fine where they're like nuclear power works fine and wind power works fine in Minnesota, where it's often well below zero. You just have to be prepared for it, and the incentives have to be in place to encourage the generators to ensure that they're maintained, and perhaps some smart fixes in the ERCOT system will ensure that those maintenance activities take place like they're supposed to, or like the customers would expect that they would have. All right, so let's see. There's another question here around, I think this is related to my paper itself, about high voltage transmission lines that are needed to massively deploy. Is it possible to reach 100% carbon pollution-free electricity sector by just deploying clean energy locally? And can we install enough locally that we don't have to build any long distance high voltage transmission lines? I'll open that up to either of you. If you have thoughts on that, I can answer that as well. But
I would make an initial observation that we need to be careful about how much we crow about 100% clean energy. In our industry, with the products that we make and our customers make, you look at scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions and energy use, and it used to be mostly an issue of how much energy did the device consume when it was being operated. Now, laptops in general are so efficient that most of the life cycle impact of our products is embedded energy in what it takes to make the chip, what it takes to make the PC. It takes a hell of a lot of energy to make a wind turbine, and likewise with solar panels. And so we just, obviously in the operational mode, those are clean energy sources. But I think when we think of how to get to zero, we need to remind ourselves that we need to focus on reducing the embedded carbon. As far as the math, I don't know, in answer to the question, whether you could get to 100% with just DERs. I suspect it varies dramatically from location to location, depending on what's available. So whether you could get to zero across the entire country, maybe not. That's why you need nuclear.
Yeah,
do you want to
I
weigh
was just going to say, we believe that at least for the foreseeable future, it's very important to continue to have baseload generation, clean baseload generation, like we have out of our Palo Verde nuclear power plant. And it's difficult to envision a future without that baseload generation, which necessarily warrants transmission and distribution. So it's difficult to envision, but I think technology is going to emerge in this space really quickly. I think we're going to see an escalation, a hockey stick escalation, if you will, of technology that will facilitate accelerated decarbonization. And so, it's possible. It's hard to predict what life is going to look like in this world 30 years from now.
And it also points to the importance of advancing battery technology and reducing the cost of storage, because if you have a lot of storage capabilities, that's obviously going to make it easier in any given location to be 100% locally or distributed sources. If you don't have battery technology that's affordable, that is much harder.
Got it. I agree with all of that. I'll just throw in that one interesting data point about where we might be right now. The NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, they did a study looking at the technical potential of putting solar PV on top of every existing rooftop in the United States. So it is highly, Steve, as you mentioned, it is highly regionally dependent. Certain states that have a better solar resource have more capacity or more generation available to them. But in aggregate, if you added all that up and assume that trees and other chimneys and things weren't necessarily in the way, you could get, just from that one source, you could get about a third of the electricity that we're currently producing today. Of course, the power system of the future will be a bit larger, but I think it suggests, at least in the near term, that, and there are lots of centralized utility scale generation opportunities that are available. So we're going to need that. We're going to need to do both in the near term, and those opportunities, I'm sure Ann could tell us, are a lot less expensive options than when they're pursued for residential rooftop PV. Solar utility scale is usually much cheaper. So this has been a great conversation, but unfortunately, I think we do need to wrap it up here. And I'd like to thank Steve and Ann for being such great panelists today and sharing their expertise with us. And a special thank you to their companies. I think you gave some pretty impressive statistics about their strong commitment that both Intel and APS have to decarbonization. And thanks to everybody in the audience who joined us and submitted questions. Appreciate that as well. That helps make the webinar go really well too. So thanks everyone, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.